They fired my granddaughter because she spoke to me in Vietnamese. Just one phone call. 30 seconds. And suddenly, her language, our language, was a problem. I didn't know something so small could break something so big. All I did was ask her if she remembered to eat lunch. That's it. A grandmother's question. In Vietnamese. Like I've always spoken. Like I taught her to speak. I was standing in my kitchen in Little Saigon, the late sunlight making a puddle on the tiled floor, waiting for the rice cooker to pop. Serena picked up on the third ring, her voice soft and respectful, just like I raised her. Chao Nana, Nguai. There it was, her voice, my language, a thread between us stretching over time zones, oceans, and memory. But what I didn't know, not until the next day, was that my voice, that thread, was what unraveled everything. She didn't call the next morning like she always did. Every Friday, 10 o'clock sharp. I'd sit by the window with my tea and slippers on, watching the neighborhood kids walk to school. It was our rhythm. She'd call, I'd ask about her day, her job, her dreams that she didn't talk about too much. Then we'd talk about lunch, or the weather, or some Vietnamese soap opera I was watching on YouTube. Serena always said she didn't have time for TV, but she still remembered the characters. That girl has a memory like a steel trap. But on this Friday, nothing. I called once. Twice. No answer. Left a voicemail. Nguai Goi Ne Con. Con Ko Kong. Still silence. By lunchtime, my stomach ached, not from hunger, but from a feeling I couldn't shake. Like a dish left on the stove too long. I called again, pacing my small kitchen, scolding myself for being silly. Maybe she overslept. Maybe she was busy. Maybe she dropped her phone in the sink again. She did that once and tried to dry it with rice. Then, around 2 o'clock, the phone rang. Her name lit up. I picked up fast. Serena. Troy Dat, Con Lam Nguai Lo Muon Chet. I got fired, Nguai. Her voice was flat. Like someone who hadn't slept. Not angry. Not scared. Just, tired. Sai Gi. Tai Sao. My words stumbled. What happened? There was a pause. Just breathe. The kind that says the truth is heavy, too heavy for words. Then she said it. Because of you. It took me a full minute to understand what she meant. I sat down on the kitchen stool, the plastic one with the cracked leg, and pressed the phone to my ear as if that would help make sense of it. Me? What do you mean, Con? Serena sighed. The call, Nguai. Yesterday. When you called me at work. I stepped behind the espresso machine to answer, remember? I remembered. Of course I did. She had sounded calm. Polite. Not rushed like usual. Just herself. I only asked her if she had spoken to the doctor yet about my new prescription, those pills the pharmacy in Garden Grove mixed up again. I only spoke to you for 30 seconds, she said. In Vietnamese. That's it. Then I understood. They fired you because you spoke Vietnamese. Even as I said it, it sounded ridiculous. Impossible. Something from another time. Another place. But this was California. This was 2025. Yes. And then she said the name. It was Remington. I had heard that name before. The man who always sat at the corner booth of the fancy restaurant where she worked. The kind of man who wore suits that looked like they cost more than my entire apartment. She said he drank Japanese whiskey and liked his sparkling water with exactly 2 cubes of ice. Not 1. Not 3. 2. He looked at me like I was a criminal, she said, voice cracking slightly. Like I was smuggling secrets through a phone line. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive down there and throw a bowl of fish sauce on that man's shoes. But what could I do? I was just an old woman in a house that smelled like ginger and tiger balm. All I could do was listen. And let my chest tighten as my granddaughter, my bright, brave Serena, sat in her apartment in Santa Monica, jobless, and humiliated for speaking to me the only way I ever taught her. Serena wasn't like most kids her age. I knew that from the beginning. She was born in Los Angeles, but when her parents died in that car crash, I took her to live with me. She was 7. I was already nearly 60. People told me I was too old to raise a child again. But what else could I do? She was my blood. My second chance. We moved back to Orange County, to a small apartment above a banh mi shop that smelled like heaven in Greece. I taught her everything I knew. How to make scallion pancakes without tearing them. How to fold laundry the Vietnamese way, small, neat, respectful. And how to speak, think, and dream in 2 languages. She spoke English at school. But at home, it was always Vietnamese. Not because I forced her, but because she loved it. She loved the sounds. The rhythm. The way certain words couldn't be translated because they held too much emotion. One day, when she was 12, she came home from school crying. A teacher had asked her why her lunch smelled like feet. Serena didn't say anything. She just picked at her quechua and whispered, "Nguai, why do I feel wrong?" And I had looked at her, this child who had already lost so much, and said the only thing I could. "You are not wrong, Con. They are just small inside." That was the first time I saw it in her, the quiet strength. The ability to hold her ground without shouting. Like her mother. She never stopped speaking Vietnamese. Not at home. Not with me. Even when the world told her she should. And now. That same language, the one that cradled her through nightmares and math homework and heartbreak, was the reason she was out of a job. They said I made the guest uncomfortable, she told me. That it was about professionalism and brand expectations. But Nguai, I was polite. I wasn't even on the floor. Did you explain? I did. It didn't matter. There was silence between us. I wanted to tell her to fight. To storm back in there and make them explain. But I also knew the exhaustion in her voice. The kind that doesn't come from just one day, but from years of holding your breath in places that only want you if you stay quiet. So instead, I said, "Are you okay?" She paused. "I'm tired. But yes. I'm okay." I didn't believe her. But I didn't push. That night, I sat by the window and watched the streetlights flicker on one by one. The noodle shop downstairs closed early. The neighbor's cat skittered across the sidewalk. And I thought about all the times I told Serena to be proud of who she was. That this country was better than what I had left behind. But maybe I had been wrong. Maybe I had mistaken silence for safety. Because now, the very thing I had passed on to her, the words, the history, the sound of my own mother's lullabies, was being used against her. And the worst part? She wasn't even surprised. That's what broke my heart the most. Not that she lost her job. But that she had seen it coming. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about that call. Replaying it in my head. How soft she sounded. How careful. As if she already knew she might be punished for just being herself. I wondered what Remington had heard. Did he understand any of it? Did he think we were talking about him? Or was it just the unfamiliarity? The foreignness? Some people are afraid of what they can't control. And language? That's power. That's the connection. That's survival. Maybe that's what scared him. Maybe that's why he stayed quiet and let the management do his dirty work. And maybe that's why, the next morning, I sat down at my little kitchen table, picked up a pen, and wrote down every word I could remember from that phone call. Not because I needed proof, but because I needed to remember that it mattered. That we mattered. That our words, even the ones whispered, deserve to exist without apology. They say silence is golden. But sometimes, silence feels like cement, poured slowly, steadily, until it hardens around your feet. That was how Serena sounded the day after they fired her. Not loud. Not angry. Not even broken. Just, heavy. She came over late that afternoon. I didn't even know she was coming. She still had the spare key. She let herself in and walked through the door like a ghost. No shoes, no makeup, no earrings. Her black hoodie hung from her shoulders like it weighed 20 pounds. "I brought Bon Bo," she said. I blinked. "Tu Nien Mang Duan Toi Chi Vei Con." "I didn't know what else to do," she said, placing the bag on the kitchen counter. "You always say, bring something when you're sad." She wasn't crying. But her eyes were dull, dimmed like candles left in the wind too long. And when she sat down, she curled up on my couch like she used to when she was 10 years old and couldn't sleep after a thunderstorm. "I didn't cry," she said. "I know," I replied. "I wanted to," she added. "But I think I'm just used to it now." That sentence, it slid into me like a knife made of paper. Quiet. Thin. Almost harmless. But sharp where it counts. This wasn't the first time someone made Serena feel small. It wasn't even the second. You don't raise a child in America with a Vietnamese name, with Vietnamese hair, with Vietnamese rhythms in her voice, and expect the world to wrap her in a warm blanket of acceptance. But I had hoped. I had hoped that by the time she grew up, by the time she spoke 2 languages fluently, paid her taxes, served champagne with perfect posture, said "excuse me" even when others didn't hold the door, people would see her as fully human. Not a risk to the brand. That's what her manager had told her. "Your behavior wasn't inappropriate," she said. But it was complicated. Serena didn't yell at her. She just stood there, in her black uniform, hands still holding the final paycheck like a receipt for her dignity. She couldn't even look me in the eye, Serena told me that night. She said she respected me. That's when I knew I was about to be fired. I asked her if she wanted to stay the night. She shook her head. "No, Nguai. I just wanted to see you. That's all." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the sound of the neighbor's ceiling fan upstairs. The sun had gone down without us noticing. The kitchen smelled like lemongrass and soy sauce, and the edges of something were burning slightly in the oven. Serena reached for one of the Bon Bo she brought and tore off a small piece, but didn't eat it. Then, almost too quietly, she said, "They're not scared of the words. They're scared of what the words represent." I looked at her. "What do you mean, Con?" She shrugged. "Vietnamese. Mandarin. Spanish. Navajo. They hear us speaking something they don't understand, and it reminds them the world isn't built just for them." She paused. "And some of them hate being reminded." I wanted to argue. Say that maybe it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe they didn't mean it that way. But Serena had always had a sharper sense of truth than I did. Even as a child, she could see through people's kindness like glass. She told me more details, bit by bit, like she didn't want to say them out loud but needed to. She told me how Remington just stared at her. How did he not raise his voice? Didn't complain to her face. But 30 minutes after that call with me, he typed something into his phone. Paid his bill. Left. I should have known, she whispered. But you did nothing wrong, I said again. I know, she replied. But it doesn't matter. And maybe that was what hurt the most. Not that she was fired. But that she had been trained by life, by the world, by years of polite dismissal, to accept it without shock. I didn't sleep that night. Again. I kept replaying the conversation. Kept imagining Serena standing there in that restaurant. All those polished glasses and folded napkins and fake smiles. All that careful choreography just to keep certain people comfortable. And here was Serena, trying to stay invisible and excellent all at once. Speaking softly. Whispering to her grandmother behind a service wall. Being punished for something as sacred as checking on my blood pressure. How do you explain to a man like Remington what that call meant? It wasn't just small talk. It was care. It was a ritual. When I called Serena, I was doing what my mother once did with me. Checking in. Making sure the next generation was okay. Passing along love in the shape of concern. And now, that moment, a moment of quiet tenderness, was branded a threat. 2 days later, I was watering the orchids on my balcony when my phone buzzed. Serena again. They're talking about it, she said. Who? Everyone. Turns out, her coworker, Milo, had posted about what happened. No names. No company. Just a paragraph in a private Facebook group for restaurant staff in LA. A coworker of mine got fired yesterday, he wrote. Not for being rude, or late, or stealing. She answered a 30-second phone call in Vietnamese. In a restaurant that serves pho and Asian fusion. The guest didn't like it. Now she's gone. Think about that. That post had been shared. And reshared. And reshared again. Within 24 hours, someone had figured out which restaurant it was. And within 48 hours, Serena's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. They're asking me to do interviews, she said. Podcasts. News. Even some community groups. And what will you say? I asked. She was quiet for a second. Nothing. Not yet. I just want to breathe. I understood. The world moves fast now. News travels like wildfire. But grief doesn't. Betrayal doesn't. They move slowly. Like molasses. Like thick soup left to simmer too long. Serena wasn't scared. But she was tired. Tired of always having to prove she belonged. Tired of smiling through dismissal. Tired of working twice as hard for half the benefit. And now. Now she was being invited to tell her story, not as a person, but as a symbol. A case study. An example. She didn't want that. She just wanted to speak to her grandmother in peace. That night, she came over again. We didn't talk much. Just watched an old episode of Paris by Night on YouTube. I made chow trang with salted duck eggs and pickled mustard greens. Her favorite. As we ate, she finally looked up and said, "You know what's funny, Nguai?" What, Con? They sell bon zio on that restaurant's brunch menu. $15 a plate. And the person who used to eat it every Sunday with her grandmother got fired for speaking the language that created it. I couldn't laugh. I couldn't even smile. Because that wasn't funny. That was America, looking at our stories and only taking the parts it could sell. Later that night, after Serena left, I stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes and whispered to myself. They don't want the whole recipe. Just the flavor. They wanted our spices, our soups, our stories, but not our speech. They wanted our food, but not our voices. Our culture, without the complication of our presence. The next morning, I took out my old journals. The ones I kept hidden in the bottom drawer of my nightstand. Pages filled with misshapen handwriting, bits of recipes, scraps of letters I never sent. Memories of my husband, of the boat, of the camps, of Serena when she was small and wore plastic sandals with tiny flowers on them. I turned to a blank page. And wrote, in ink. They told her she didn't belong because they couldn't understand her. But they never asked to understand. And that's the real shame. Then I folded the page, tucked it into the pocket of Serena's old sweater still hanging on my coat rack, and said a quiet prayer. Not for vengeance. Not even for justice. Just for the chance, one day soon, for my granddaughter to speak without flinching. To answer her phone in Vietnamese. To say, Nguyen, out loud. And to know, deep in her bones, that her voice belongs. Here. Now. Always. Some people think trauma sounds like screaming. But no. Real trauma, at least the kind I know, sounds like nothing at all. Like the quiet splash of water behind a boat at 2 a.m. Like the crumpling of paper in a dark government office. Like a grandmother whispering to her granddaughter, no, no, don't say that word at school. The worst memories don't yell. They wait. When Serena was 12, she came home from school one day with a project. A family tree. I remember the look on her face. That awkward tension between curiosity and discomfort. She sat at the kitchen table, chewing on the back of her pencil, staring at the blank worksheet the teacher had given her. There's a spot here for country of origin, she said. Should I write Vietnam? I nodded. Of course. But what if they ask questions? Then you answer. What if I don't know what to say? I looked at her then, not with frustration, but with a kind of ache that never fully healed. You don't need to explain where you come from to anyone, Con. You just carry it with pride. Even if they don't understand. She wrote Vietnam in small, careful print. And for the next few days, she asked 100 questions. About our old house in Hue. About my wedding dress. About what her grandfather liked to eat. She made me tell the story about the mango tree in our backyard, the one that split during the typhoon of 1964. I answered everything I could. But I didn't tell her the hardest parts. I didn't tell her about the night I left Vietnam. How I boarded a boat with nothing but a drawstring bag of dried shrimp and old photos wrapped in plastic. How the sea smelled like fuel and vomit and prayers. How my husband was dragged off the boat 3 hours before we left, dragged into the dark by men with guns who said they needed more room. How I never saw him again. I didn't tell her about the Malaysian refugee camp, the tents that collapsed in the wind, the rats that chewed through sandals. I didn't tell her that I sometimes traded canned mackerel for tampons, or that I once slapped a teenage boy who tried to lift the corner of my skirt while I was sleeping. I didn't tell her because I didn't want her to carry that kind of silence. So I filled her days with other things. Softer things. Like scallion pancakes. Like ao dai patterns. Like the lullaby my mother sang to me on cold nights in Hue, when the power would flicker and we huddled under one blanket and waited for the shelling to stop. Serena was a bright child. Too bright. She noticed things early. When she was 9, she asked why the pharmacist in Garden Grove always talked slowly to me, like I was hard of hearing. When she was 10, she asked why the waiter at the Italian place looked surprised when she ordered in perfect English. When she was 11, she asked why I never spoke Vietnamese at the post office. That was the one that stopped me. I just don't want to cause trouble, I said. She frowned. But it's not trouble. It's who you are. I wanted to believe that. I did. But I remembered too much. I remembered being told, more than once, that, this is America, speak English. I remembered the immigration officer in 1983 who asked me why I didn't try harder to assimilate. I remembered my first job at a laundromat in Westminster, where the owner made me write my Vietnamese name smaller on my name tag, so the regular customers wouldn't get confused. So yes, I taught Serena Vietnamese. But I also taught her when to hide it. I taught her to code switch. To nod politely when someone asked, "Where are you from?" even if she was born 3 blocks from them. I taught her to tuck her language into the folds of her pocket like a tissue, ready when needed, but out of sight. I thought I was protecting her. But now I see, I was passing down the same silence that nearly swallowed me. One afternoon, when Serena was 15, we went to the open-air market in Westminster. It was a rare Saturday off for both of us. We were walking past the stalls when we heard an older man yell at a vendor. I said, "I want 3 pounds of shrimp. You understand English or not?" The woman selling shrimp, probably in her 60s, smiled nervously and bowed her head. Her hands trembled. The man muttered, "Goddamn immigrants," and stormed off. I was frozen. Serena wasn't. She walked up to the woman, switched to Vietnamese, and said, "Don't worry, ba. Your English is fine. His kindness is what's broken." That was the first time I realized Serena would never carry her tongue like a burden. But it also scared me. Because America doesn't always reward girls like that. I had hoped the world would grow with her. I had hoped the restaurants, the schools, the offices, the people, would grow into a version of America where a young woman could speak to her grandmother without consequence. But now, they fired her for 30 seconds of love. For using the only language I could ever say, "I'm proud of you," in without crying. And the worst part? They didn't even say they were sorry. They just said it made someone uncomfortable. That word, uncomfortable, has become a weapon. I've lived long enough to know that discomfort is just the polite cousin of fear. People say they're uncomfortable when they don't want to admit they're afraid. Afraid of what they don't understand. Afraid that someone else might belong just as much as they do. Afraid that their version of normal is just one shade among many. Serena didn't curse. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten anyone. She spoke. That's it. She spoke. And for some people, that is the most dangerous thing a girl like her can do. A few nights later, we were watching TV together. A commercial came on, one of those shiny tech ads with people smiling in cafes, holding phones, laughing with friends who all look like they stepped out of a catalog. Serena looked at the screen, then looked at me. "Do you ever feel like we're just background characters?" I turned to her. "What do you mean?" "In this country," she said. "Like they want our food. Our culture. Our music. But not us. Not really. Just the parts that sell." I didn't have an answer. Because I had felt that way for decades. And I had buried it under recipes and phone bills and whispered lullabies. But Serena? She was saying it out loud. Later that night, she read me some of the messages she had been getting online. One woman wrote, "My grandmother raised me in Spanish, but I stopped speaking it at work because people would look at me like I was plotting something. Thank you for reminding me it's not shameful." Another person said, "They fired you for speaking to your grandmother? That's disgusting. I hope you sue them into the ground." There were hundreds of these. People of all ages, all backgrounds. All carrying stories of being told they were too much. Too loud. Too foreign. Too other. And yet, somehow, still not enough. As Serena read those words aloud, her voice grew stronger. Not louder. Just steadier. Like a river finding its current again. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully understood until then. She didn't just inherit my language. She inherited my grief. My resilience. My fire. But unlike me, she wasn't going to swallow it. She was going to let it burn. Let it light the path. Let it speak. Even if it made the whole room uncomfortable. They served bonzio on Sundays. $15 a plate. With a tiny drizzle of tamarind reduction, 2 sprigs of cilantro, and a pickled carrot folded like a ribbon. No nuoc ma'am, though, too strong, someone said. Too specific. Too real. But Vietnamese? That they could sell. They printed it on the menu. They carved it into the wood signs in brush-style font. They described the dishes using words like heritage, ancestral, and farm-to-table tradition. Yet the moment my granddaughter spoke our language, just one sentence, tucked quietly behind a wine rack, over a call from her elderly grandmother, she was told that she no longer belonged. Serena told me what the manager said when they let her go. It's not about the language, Kendra insisted. It's about perception. Guests need to feel comfortable. Comfortable? Serena repeated. It's about brand alignment, Kendra clarified, like that explained everything. Brand. Alignment. 2 words that had nothing to do with integrity, or humanity, or even logic. 2 words that let people in power pretend they weren't making decisions based on bias. Just business, they say. Just policy. But I know better. I've lived long enough to understand what's said between words. And what Serena heard, what I heard through her voice, was this. You made someone feel like they weren't in charge. And for that, you're a liability. When I was young, they called us refugees. Then immigrants. Then minorities. Then diverse hires. And now, we're brand risks. It changes shape, this prejudice. It learns to put on a tie and smile during HR meetings. But it still does what it's always done, remind us of the invisible boundary between what they want from our culture, and what they don't want from us. Serena sat across from me that night at the kitchen table. Her hair was tied back in a low puff, her hands folded neatly, as if she were still at the restaurant, still performing some unspoken ritual of perfection. I spoke softly, Nguai. I wasn't rude. I wasn't even visible. I could see her trying to make sense of it. As if logic had a place in a system built on fear. I didn't even say anything offensive. Just, Nguai, remember to drink water after your pills. That's what he heard. She shook her head and gave a bitter laugh. Imagine being offended by hydration. I didn't laugh. I couldn't. Because I had seen this before. Not with food. Not with restaurants. But with fabric. With fabric and prayer. Back in 1987, I worked at a dry cleaner in Fountain Valley. There was a woman, Linda, who wore a small gold crucifix and smiled through her teeth. One day, I asked if I could listen to Vietnamese music on the radio during closing hours. She said yes. The next week, the manager pulled me aside. We had a complaint, he said. It's not about the content, it's just that the sound made someone uncomfortable. The sound. Not the volume. The sound. That's how it starts. They don't ban the words. They ban the texture of your voice. And now, decades later, Serena was facing the same thing. The difference? She had proof. Remington didn't even deny it. He had stared at her and said, "Didn't know this place hired spies." Spies. Because she spoke Vietnamese. Not into a walkie-talkie. Not behind a closed door. But into a phone, in the open, just loud enough to make sure I took my pills. And even then, he was not asked to leave. He was not reprimanded. He was not asked to explain himself. Instead, they turned to Serena and said, "Some guests don't like it when things feel unfamiliar." That word again. Unfamiliar. As if speaking to your grandmother in your language is the same as making a stranger feel unsafe. The absurdity of it all boiled over in me. La Mer, the restaurant where Serena worked, didn't just serve Asian food. It celebrated it. It hired chefs who posted selfies with fish sauce bottles. It partnered with local Asian creators during Lunar New Year. It hosted $90 tasting menus with fusion dishes like banh mi sliders and kimchi risotto. They loved the flavor. But not the history. They wanted the spices without the stories. The recipes without the roots. The language on the plate, but never in the air. Serena knew this, of course. She wasn't naive. But knowing something is wrong and experiencing it are not the same thing. You know what Kendra said when I asked if I was being fired for speaking Vietnamese? I looked at her. She said, "It's complicated." Serena paused. Complicated. She rolled the word around in her mouth like it tasted sour. That's the word they use when they want to make you feel like you're too sensitive. Like the problem isn't them, it's your inability to understand nuance. I reached for her hand across the table. "You understand nuance just fine, Con," I said. "They're just used to people nodding." That weekend, Serena stayed over. I made thit co and jasmine rice. We watched old Vietnamese variety shows on YouTube. During one of the musical performances, she leaned over and whispered, "You know, I used to be embarrassed by this music." "Why?" I asked. "Because I thought it made me look backward. Like, I didn't belong here." I nodded. I knew that feeling too well. But now, she continued, "I listen to it, and I don't feel embarrassed. I feel angry. Angry that someone taught me to be ashamed of the only thing that's ever felt like home." I didn't have the words to answer her then. So I did what mothers and grandmothers have done for centuries. I went to the kitchen and made chabier mao. Not because sweets fix everything. But because care has a taste. And sometimes, it speaks where words cannot. We sat on the balcony, eating quietly, watching the moon rise above the rust-colored rooftops. A neighbor played a love ballad on a guitar 3 buildings down. The air smelled like jasmine and street dust. And then Serena said something I'll never forget. "Nguai, I don't think I want to work in that industry anymore." It surprised me, not because I didn't understand, but because I always thought Serena loved the restaurant world. The choreography. The service. The craft of it all. But she was tired. "I don't want to have to shrink myself just to hand someone a cocktail," she said. "I don't want to lower my voice every time someone walks in with expensive shoes. I don't want to speak only when it's convenient for them to listen." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. It just settled. Like someone placing a heavy truth on the table between us. The next morning, she got up early and made me breakfast. Eggs with soy sauce, avocado toast, and a tiny bowl of strawberries. "Fancy," I teased. She smiled. California fusion. Then, as she packed her bag to leave, she paused. "You think I should speak up?" I looked at her, not as her grandmother, but as a woman who had been silenced too many times in her life. I think, I said, that if you don't, they'll write their version of the story. And that version will erase you. She nodded. And for the first time in days, she stood a little straighter. After she left, I sat in the kitchen and thought about how many stories never get told. How many women like me learned to keep their heads down. How many mothers and grandmothers swallowed their pain so their children could eat. How many of us taught our daughters to survive by being small. And how much does it cost us? Maybe it was time to do something different. Maybe it was time to teach Serena to be large. To take up space. To speak. Even if the world turned its head. Even if it flinched. That afternoon, I picked up my phone. I opened the Notes app. And I wrote. They loved the way our food tasted. But they didn't love the way our voices sounded. They celebrated our heritage until it showed up in a human body. Until it looked them in the eye. Until it said, I deserve to be here too. Then I closed the app. And whispered a quiet prayer to the women who came before me. Not in English. But in the language they gave me. The one Serena used. The one that got her fired. The one that still carries us home. I didn't know who Milo was until the day he made my granddaughter famous. Serena had mentioned him once or twice, Milo from the back station, Milo who brings in extra soup for staff meals, Milo who knows when to give space and when to sit next to you without saying a word. That kind of friend. The rare kind you don't need to explain yourself to. He had worked at the restaurant longer than anyone else. 10 years, maybe more. He was Filipino on his father's side, Mexican on his mother's, with a calm face and eyes that watched everything without judgment. According to Serena, he never raised his voice but always managed to make himself heard. And it was Milo, not Serena, who finally decided that silence was no longer enough. He didn't name her. He didn't name the restaurant. He just wrote one quiet post in a private Facebook group for local service workers. A coworker of mine got fired yesterday. Not for being rude. Not for being late. Not for stealing. She took a 30-second phone call in Vietnamese during a slow shift, behind the service wall, from her grandmother. A guest didn't like it. The next morning, she was off the schedule. That was it. No hashtags. No call to action. No rage. But it was enough. By nightfall, the post had been screenshotted, shared, and reposted across multiple forums. By morning, it had reached Twitter. By lunch, people had figured out which restaurant it was. By dinner, someone had found a photo of Charles Remington III at a tech conference and added the caption. This is the guy who gets women fired for speaking to their grandma. Serena called me that night, her voice more confused than afraid. It's everywhere now, Nguai. She sounded like someone watching a tidal wave approach. Not angry. Not triumphant. Just, stunned. I asked if she was okay. I don't know, she said. I didn't ask for this. And that, I believed. Because my granddaughter was never loud. She was never the type to post long rants or point fingers. She was raised with gentleness, with poise, with the quiet kind of strength that doesn't bark, but also doesn't bend. All she had done was answer her phone. And now, her name was being spoken by strangers across the internet. I watched it unfold like a fever dream. Photos of the restaurant's menu began circulating online, with commenters noting the irony of a place that served pho, pork belly, and tamarind rice, but fired someone for speaking Vietnamese. Yelp reviews flooded in. Some were performative. Others were poignant. One simply said, "If you want the taste but not the people, maybe don't pretend you care about culture. Another wrote, my grandmother raised me in Cantonese. I haven't spoken it at work in 20 years. Reading this made me cry. I didn't know how to feel. On one hand, I was proud. People were listening. People were seeing my granddaughter. Not just as a server, not just as a name on a schedule, but as a person. But on the other hand, I was scared. Because visibility is not always protection. Sometimes, it's a target. 3 days later, a reporter called. Then, a podcast producer. The local councilwoman. Serena didn't answer any of them at first. She stayed home, turned her phone face down, lit incense in the morning, and made tea with ginger and honey. I just want to think, she said. I told her that was fine. She didn't owe anyone a performance. Her pain was not public property. But Milo couldn't stay quiet. And truthfully, neither could the people who read his words. Because something in that post had struck a nerve. People began to share their own stories. A Thai woman who got written up for answering her mother in their native tongue. A Nigerian man was told to speak English or don't speak at all by a customer at a grocery store. A second-generation Korean girl who forgot how to speak to her grandmother before she died, because she'd been too afraid to use Korean in public. They weren't just stories. They were confessions. Grief laid bare. Not because they had done something wrong, but because they had learned to bury what made them whole. Serena finally agreed to meet with a journalist, just one. A woman in her 40s, quiet voice, half Chinese, half Irish. She met Serena at a park, under a magnolia tree, and asked if she was comfortable being recorded. I'm not looking for attention, Serena told her. I just want people to know I wasn't trying to start anything. I was just checking on my grandmother. That's how the article opened. Not with outrage. Not with hashtags. But with a granddaughter's voice saying, I just wanted to make sure she took her pills. That line traveled farther than we expected. When Serena came to visit that weekend, I made bonnet. She laughed when she saw them. You always make those when someone in the family is going through a transition, she said. I smiled. You remember. She sat down, peeled the banana leaf from the sticky rice, and took a bite. Then she said, do you think I should speak up more? I hesitated. Because I had spent my life surviving by saying less. By being polite. By being easy to work with. By speaking English with a smile, even when my heart was begging to say something else. But Serena? She was not me. And thank God for that. I reached across the table and touched her hand. If you feel it in your chest, say it, I said. She nodded, slowly. Then she told me something that brought tears to my eyes. Milo said something to me the other day, she said. He said, they erased you with a smile. Time to speak louder. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Because that was it. That was the truth I had never been able to put into words. Most people think racism is loud. That it shouts. It wears ugly slogans and carries torches. But the most dangerous kind? It smiles. It nods. It says, thank you, and still puts your name on the termination list the next morning. Later that night, Serena showed me Milo's post. It had over 10,000 shares. I read it once. Then again. Then I closed my eyes. Because somewhere deep inside me, a wound I had forgotten how to name, started to loosen. Not heal. Not yet. But loosen. Like a knot that had been tightened too long. And in that moment, I thought about my grandmother. She never learned to read. Never traveled farther than Da Nang. Never saw snow. But she taught me how to wrap sticky rice in banana leaves. How to kneel before a family altar. How to speak with care, even when the world was cruel. She didn't have the chance to raise her voice. But now, through Serena, and maybe even through Milo, something of her is speaking. So no. Serena didn't ask for this attention. She didn't want to become a face for anything. She only wanted to be heard. But sometimes, when the world has gone too long pretending not to hear you, a whisper becomes a revolution. And Serena? She was no longer whispering. There was no grand moment. No rally. No microphone. No crowd with fists raised. Just Serena, sitting at the edge of my couch in her oldest sweater, with a chipped mug of tea in her hands, typing something quietly into her phone. That's how she chose to speak. Not with anger. Not with protest. But with stillness. With clarity. That morning, the sky outside was gray. California gray, the kind that pretends it's going to rain but never does. The kind that makes you wonder if the world is holding its breath. Inside, the house smelled like lemongrass and the gentle bitterness of dried tea leaves. Serena's fingers hovered over the screen, unsure. She looked up at me. I'm not trying to be famous, Nguai. I nodded. I'm not trying to burn anything down. I know, I said. Her voice cracked slightly. I don't want someone else to go through this and think they were wrong for speaking to the person who raised them. And then she hit post. The message was short. Not a rant. Not a sob story. Just the truth. My name is Serena Tran. I was fired last week from a restaurant in Santa Monica after a customer complained about me speaking Vietnamese to my grandmother on the phone. I wasn't rude. I wasn't on the floor. I wasn't unprofessional. I was just speaking to someone I love, in a language that's part of me. That's all it took. If you've ever been made to feel small because of who you are, how you speak, or where you come from, I see you. That was it. But within 12 hours, it had over 40,000 likes. I sat with her as the notifications rolled in. Not to monitor. Not to intervene. Just to be there. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just watched. Like someone finally seeing themselves in a mirror after a long time in the dark. The comments came quickly. This happened to my aunt in Texas. My mom stopped speaking Tagalog at work because of stuff like this. I didn't know how much I needed to read this. Some were from people who barely spoke any Vietnamese or any other language from their ancestry, but who still carried the wound of silence. Some were from Black Americans, recalling being told their accents were too much or their names too difficult to pronounce. Some were from strangers overseas. And each message made Serena lean back a little more, like the weight of it all was pressing into her chest. The next day, she was invited to speak on a local radio show. She declined. Then a podcast. She declined again. Then, a community panel on language rights. I don't want to be anyone's hero, she told me. You don't have to be, I replied. Just be someone's reminder. That afternoon, she stayed longer than usual. We watched the news together. There was a brief mention of the viral story, young woman fired after speaking Vietnamese to her grandmother, Santa Monica restaurant under scrutiny. That was the first time I heard her name on television. Serena Tran, a 27-year-old server and aspiring chef. The anchor mispronounced Tran. But I didn't care. Because the name was there. Visible. Heard. Later that evening, we walked to the corner market together. A woman near the entrance, a stranger, stopped us. Excuse me, she said to Serena. Are you the girl from Twitter? Serena hesitated. Yes. The woman smiled. Thank you. My daughter showed me your post. We've been talking about language in our house again. She's practicing Spanish now. Serena nodded. That's wonderful. The woman looked at me next. And thank you, too. I blinked. For what? For raising someone brave. I didn't know what to say. Because at that moment, I didn't feel brave. I felt exposed. When we got home, I pulled Serena aside and said, "Be careful." Of what? She asked. Of people who love the story more than they love the person. She looked at me, confused. People will want you to keep telling it. Over and over. Louder. Braver. More dramatic. They'll want pain they can share and quote, but not the quiet parts. Not the ones that feel like waiting rooms or kitchen floors. She nodded, slowly. I don't want to perform. I just want to exist. That's enough, I said. The next day, she received an email from the restaurant's legal counsel. Subject line, request for conversation, Juniper and Ash response. The message was short and polite. Serena. We are aware of the recent attention surrounding your departure. We would like to discuss a possible resolution and ensure both sides are heard. Please let us know if you are open to a brief meeting. J. Roth, Legal Counsel. Serena stared at it for a long time. Then she turned to me. What do you think they want? I shook my head. Not to make it right. Just to make it quiet. She didn't respond right away. She went for a walk instead. To the beach. Alone. When she came back, there was sand on her shoes and a stillness in her voice. I'll meet with them, she said. But only on my terms. The meeting was held in a bland office suite near Westwood. Fluorescent lights. Gray chairs. A carafe of lukewarm water on a side table. Serena wore jeans, a plain white t-shirt, and her favorite sneakers. No earrings. No makeup. No armor. Kendra was already seated when Serena walked in. Roth sat beside her, in a suit that looked too tight around the collar. He opened with pleasantries. Thanked Serena for her time. Acknowledged the emotionally charged nature of recent events. Then came the offer. We're prepared to issue a formal apology and offer 3 months severance in exchange for closure. Serena didn't flinch. She looked straight at him and said. Closure for who? Roth blinked. Kendra shifted in her seat. Serena continued. I want the apology to be public. No NDA. I want you to admit that I was let go because someone didn't like hearing me speak to my grandmother. I want you to say it wasn't about professionalism. It was about fear. There was a long silence. Then, Kendra finally spoke. Her voice was soft. Unsteady. We'll issue the statement, she said. You didn't do anything wrong. And that moment, was the first time I allowed myself to exhale. That afternoon, the restaurant posted a formal statement on all its platforms. We acknowledge that the termination of Serena Tran was handled in a way that did not reflect our values of diversity, respect, and inclusion. Speaking another language, especially one tied to family and heritage, should never be grounds for dismissal. We sincerely apologize to Serena and the broader community. We are reviewing our internal policies and employee training moving forward. Some people applauded. Some called it performative. Some moved on to the next story. Serena didn't care. Because for her, the point wasn't to make them hurt. It was to make them see. To make everyone see. That night, she came over again. She didn't talk much. Just sat by the window, legs tucked under her, staring out at the quiet street. "You did it," I said softly. She shook her head. "I didn't do it to win." "No," I said. "You did it so they'd finally see." She smiled. But it was a tired smile. Like someone who had walked a long road barefoot and still had miles to go. Before she left, I handed her a small envelope. Inside was a photo. She and I, standing in front of the family altar, 10 years earlier. She was 17. I was already in my 60s. We were both barefoot. Both smiling. On the back, I had written, "Never forget where your voice comes from." Serena held the photo for a long time. Then tucked it into her bag. As I watched her walk down the street, I thought about how strange it is. That speaking can be such a radical act. All Serena had done was answer the phone. All she had done was speak. To me. To her roots. To herself. And for some people, that was the loudest, most dangerous thing she could have done. But she didn't speak to fight. She spoke to exist. And that was more than enough. You would think an apology would bring peace. But peace, I've learned, doesn't come wrapped in official statements. The restaurant's post went live on a Thursday afternoon. By Friday morning, people were already debating it online. Some said it was long overdue. Others called it damage control dressed in remorse. A few praised the wording. A few tore it apart. A few just said, "Too little, too late." Serena read it once. Then closed her laptop. "They did it," she said quietly. "Now they can say they did the right thing." I watched her as she poured tea into 2 small cups, her hands steady but her shoulders drawn in, like someone preparing for a storm that might still come anyway. I read the statement, too. We acknowledged that the termination of Serena Tran was handled in a way that did not reflect our values. Speaking another language, especially one tied to family and heritage, should never be grounds for dismissal. We apologize. The words were clean. Careful. Measured like a recipe meant to avoid lawsuits. It wasn't a bad statement. It just wasn't brave. Bravery is not saying sorry when the crowd demands it. Bravery is standing up for someone before the cameras roll. Before the headlines. Before the hashtags. But I suppose that would have meant seeing Serena as someone worth standing up for in the first place. Still, I was grateful. Grateful that her name was cleared. Grateful that her silence had been lifted. Grateful that no one could say she'd made it up or exaggerated. But what was I most grateful for? She didn't let them rewrite her. They offered her 3-month severance and a carefully prepared exit. She asked for something far more uncomfortable. The truth. And she got it. In print. In public. In their own words. Milo called her that evening. "They posted it," he said. "It's real." "I saw," she replied. "They're in full PR recovery mode now. The staff got a memo this morning about cultural sensitivity training." Serena laughed softly. Better late than never. Then she paused. "You okay?" Milo asked. "I think so," she said. "I'm just tired of being the moment." The what? The viral moment. The headline. The girl who spoke Vietnamese. Then be more than that, he said. That weekend, Serena came to visit again. I made thit co, the long stewed version, with boiled eggs that had soaked up all the soy and sweetness. The way she likes it. She brought flowers, yellow daisies, and placed them in the chipped vase by the kitchen window. We ate in comfortable silence, the kind only family can share. After the dishes were washed and the tea had steeped, she said, "Do you ever feel like you've become a story that someone else tells?" I looked at her. "All the time," I said. She was quiet after that. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out the letter. Not from the restaurant. From a girl in Michigan. It was handwritten, on lined paper, the kind used in middle school. Serena read it aloud. "Dear Serena, I'm 14 and I'm Korean American. My parents speak Korean at home, and I used to be embarrassed by that. One time, I told them not to talk to me in public because I didn't want kids at school to laugh. But then I saw what happened to you and how you stood up for yourself. I cried. I told my mom I was sorry. We made kimchi together last weekend, and we laughed in Korean. Thank you." When Serena finished, she folded the letter carefully and set it beside her tea. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. That was when I realized something had shifted. This was no longer just a story about a job lost. It was a story about a door opened. About a language unhidden. About the sound of a grandmother's voice echoing beyond one family. In the following days, Serena's blog, originally just a quiet place for recipes and food photos, started getting traffic. Not viral. Not explosive. Just steady. People left comments. "Your post made me cook my grandmother's dishes again. I didn't know I was allowed to feel proud of my name." One woman wrote, "My father stopped speaking Navajo when he joined the military. Last week, we sat down and he taught me 3 phrases. I'm 47. I never thought I'd hear his native voice again." These messages didn't scream. They whispered. But they filled the house like incense, soft, sacred, lingering. Serena didn't go back to restaurant work. Not because she couldn't. Because she wouldn't. "I'm done shrinking myself to fit someone else's table," she said. Instead, she enrolled in a culinary program at a local college, part-time, affordable, and no frills. Just sharp knives and clean counters and a small room of people who didn't care what language she used as long as her hands were steady and her food was honest. She began posting more on her blog, not just recipes, but reflections. On growing up bilingual. On being othered while carrying culture. On the strange loneliness of being too much in some places and too little in others. People listened. Not thousands. But enough. Enough to remind her she was not alone. One evening, I found her in the backyard, sitting cross-legged on the old stone bench, staring at the stars. "What are you thinking about?" I asked. She shrugged. "Nothing. Everything." I sat beside her. After a while, she said, "You know what scared me most, Nguai?" "What, Con?" "That I would start to believe them. That I didn't belong. That I was a problem." I reached over and held her hand. "You were never the problem," I said. "They were just too small to see the whole of you." She rested her head on my shoulder, like she used to when she was little. And I remembered the first time she said, "Nguai," as a child, barely 3, wobbling in her slippers, reaching for my hand after a nightmare. She had cried into my lap that night, whispering the only word she knew for comfort. Now, that same word had cost her a job. But had also lit a fire. Strange, how things come full circle. The next morning, she made breakfast, fried rice with leftover vegetables and a runny egg on top. "I'm going to speak on a podcast," she said, over the clinking of chopsticks. "Oh. They asked me twice before. I said no. But this time. I want to." "Why now?" She smiled. Because I'm not just reacting anymore. I'm ready to share. I didn't go with her. But I waited by the radio when it aired. And when her voice came on, clear, steady, warm, I closed my eyes. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She told the story as it happened. And when the host asked what she wanted listeners to take away, she said, "You don't owe your silence to anyone. Not to keep your job. Not to make someone else comfortable. Not to fit into a place that was never built for all of you." And then, she paused. Just long enough to let the words settle. Afterward, she came home. We didn't say much. Just sat by the window, sharing orange slices and the quiet satisfaction of something honest being set free. That night, as I folded laundry and tucked away the photo she'd left on the table, me and her at the altar, I whispered a prayer. Not for success. Not even for healing. But for her voice. To stay here. To stay strong. To never again be mistaken for something dangerous. Or worse, something unnecessary. Because now I knew. Her voice didn't just belong in our house. It belonged in the world. There's a sound that lives in my bones. Not music. Not prayer. Not even my breath. It's the sound of Serena saying, "Nagwai," out loud, without lowering her voice. Without looking over her shoulder. Without waiting for permission. That's the sound of freedom, I think. Not fireworks. Not applause. Just your name, spoken like it matters. A month had passed since the apology. Life settled into something softer. Serena still came by on weekends. She still brewed tea just a little too strong. She still sang snippets of Vietnamese pop songs under her breath while chopping scallions, like she didn't even notice she was doing it. But something about her had changed. She stood taller. Spoke slower. Laughed easier. Not because things were perfect. But because, for the first time, she wasn't shrinking to make space for someone else's comfort. She had enrolled in her second term at the culinary program. Started a new recipe series on her blog, Dishes My Nagwai Made Me Eat Twice. The first post was about Ka Kotu. The second, Bun Ryu. Each entry started with a story. Not a dramatic one. Just a memory. Her leaning over the stove on a rainy afternoon. Me scolding her for adding too much nuoc ma'am. Her hiding a third egg in her bowl because I told her two were enough. The comments rolled in slowly. Messages from people who hadn't tasted these dishes in years. Some who'd never cooked them before but were trying, for the first time, for their kids, for themselves. One Saturday morning, we went to the farmer's market together. The same one where she used to beg me not to speak Vietnamese too loudly. This time, she walked beside me, her voice clear and gentle. At the herb stall, she greeted the vendor in Vietnamese. He responded with surprise, then delight. "You speak our language so beautifully," he said. Serena smiled. "I got it from my grandmother." He turned to me. Bowed slightly. "Ba gioi qua." She teaches well. I nodded, heart swelling. Not with pride. But with relief. Because now, she wasn't just holding the language. She was offering it. Unhidden. Undiminished. That afternoon, we sat on the back porch, peeling mangoes and talking about nothing in particular. The sun dipped lower, the light soft and honey-colored. A breeze moved through the old wind chimes that had hung there since Serena was a child. I looked at her, cross-legged on the step, mango juice on her fingers, content. "You're different now," I said. She looked up. "Different how?" "Not less scared. Just, more full. She thought for a moment. Then nodded. I think I stopped waiting for someone to make room for me, she said. I started making it myself. Later that night, she pulled out an old photo album from the shelf. One of the ones with plastic pages that stuck when the air was too humid. We flipped through it slowly. Black and white photos of my parents. Color one of Serena at school plays, wearing too big out dye, and grinning like she'd swallowed the moon. On one page, she paused. It was a photo of her as a child, maybe 6 or 7, sitting on my lap, holding a piece of tangerine to my mouth like she was feeding me. I remember this day, she said. We had just moved into the apartment after Dad died. You said we were going to start over. We did, I replied. She looked at me then. Eyes shiny, but steady. You gave me my voice, she whispered. Even when you were afraid of using yours. I looked away. The tears came too fast. I didn't know how to protect you, I said. Not from the world. Not from what it does to voices like ours. You did, she said, reaching for my hand. You protected the part of me that never learned how to lie about where I came from. The next day, she told me she'd been invited to speak at a university panel on language, culture, and identity. Will you go? I asked. She nodded. I want students to know that speaking another language is not a liability. It's a kind of wealth. You'll be brilliant, I said. I'll be me, she replied. That evening, she posted something new on her blog. It wasn't a recipe. It was just a paragraph. People always talk about finding your voice. Like it's lost. But I never lost mine. I just got used to lowering it. They made me feel like it was too loud. But it never was. My voice sounds like home. Like my grandmother's kitchen. Like the soft syllables that carried me through every hardship. I'm not sorry for that sound. I'm proud of it. The post was shared by an advocacy group for multilingual families. Then by a parenting blog. Then by a cooking site. But Serena didn't track the numbers. She just smiled and said, I think I'm building something now. Not reacting. Just building. I nodded. You're planting a language garden, I said. She laughed. With Noach ma'am fertilizer? Yes, I said. And chili oil. And ginger. And the truth. One morning, while folding laundry, I received a call from my cousin in Florida. I saw Serena on the news, she said. They did a whole feature on her. They called her the voice of the unapologetic generation. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the bedsheet. Serena. My shy girl with the too long sleeves and the habit of saying, sorry, for taking up space. That Serena was now being celebrated for simply being herself. The world had turned upside down. But not everything was flashy. Not everything was headline-worthy. Some days, she still got anxious. Still wondered if it would all disappear. Still checked herself before speaking Vietnamese in unfamiliar spaces. But the difference now? She did it anyway. That summer, she hosted a small dinner in her backyard for close friends. She called it Memory Night. Each dish came with a story. Each guest brought a recipe from someone they loved. Each language was spoken freely. No translations required. No apologies given. Just food. Just laughter. Just voices. At the end of the night, Serena stood up, raised her glass, and said, to every grandmother who gave us a name that wasn't easy to pronounce. To every parent who packed us lunches that smelled different. To every word we were told to hide. To every part of us, we tried to be silent. May we speak freely now. And may we teach others to do the same. The guests clinked glasses. And I cried quietly into my jasmine tea. Because this was the future I never thought I'd live to see. Not a perfect world, but a braver one. One where my granddaughter wasn't afraid to be heard. Now, every time the phone rings, and I hear her voice on the other end, Chow Nana, Nguai, I don't brace myself. I don't worry who's listening. I just answer. Because we've stopped whispering. We've stopped making ourselves small. We speak. Because speaking is living. And living, truly living, is never something to apologize for. What this story teaches us. This isn't just a story about a job lost, it's about the quiet power of reclaiming your voice. For many of us, especially those in our golden years, we know what it means to hold our tongues, to keep the peace, to speak softly so others feel comfortable. But silence doesn't always protect us. Sometimes, it erases us. Serena's journey reminds us that language is not just how we communicate. It's how we love, remember, and pass down the stories of those who came before us. Her courage to speak in her grandmother's voice, in her family's language, in her truth echoes the lived experiences of so many immigrants, parents, and grandparents who were once told to keep their accents quiet and their memories tucked away. This story honors every grandparent who held a culture together through soup, lullabies, and whispered prayers. It reminds us that we're never too old to speak up, or to encourage our children and grandchildren to do the same. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of someone you love, please like, share, and leave a comment with your thoughts or personal story. And if you believe in preserving voices, cultures, and dignity across generations, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your voice matters, too, and the world needs to hear it. Let's keep these stories alive. Let's keep speaking.